The first thing Kira noticed about the human wasn't his smile or his words of greeting, but the way his eyes locked onto the flickering light panel behind her the instant it began its subtle, stuttering pulse. His pupils dilated, his head tilted exactly 3 degrees, and every muscle in his face went still except for the micro-movements, tracking the failing light's rhythm with predatory precision. She froze mid-step, her hands still extended for the diplomatic handshake. Because in that instant, she understood something terrifying. This human hunted with his eyes. And right now, every instinct screaming through her Velasian biology told her to stop moving, stop breathing, stop existing as a target. Commander Marcus Chen blinked, seemed to realize what he'd done, and forced his attention back to her with visible effort, a sheepish expression crossing his scarred face. "Sorry," he said, his voice rougher than she'd expected from the hero of the Titan Station disaster. Old habit. The light was flickering in a pattern that usually means electrical fire on ships. "I didn't mean to do the thing." But Kira had already cataloged 17 instances in the past 30 seconds where his gaze had snapped to movement, the air filtration vents rotating blades, her hair settling against her shoulder, the condensation drip from the overhead pipe, the subtle sway of her jacket hem, even the rise and fall of her own breathing. She'd studied dozens of human cultural files, preparing for this first contact mission, as the Velasian Empire's youngest xenoanthropologist. But none of them mentioned this primal surveillance behavior that made her feel like prey in a predator's scope. "They didn't mention this in your file," she managed, trying to keep her voice steady and professional, trying not to think about how his eyes had tracked the movement of her throat as she swallowed. Marcus ran a hand through his dark hair, and she hated that. She noticed his eyes briefly track his own hand's movement in his peripheral vision. "Yeah, well, PTSD isn't great for diplomatic profiles," he admitted, gesturing to the chairs in the neutral meeting room aboard the joint Human Velasian Research Station Horizon's Edge. 6 months trapped in a damaged station with failing life support teaches you to notice every flicker, every sound, every change in air pressure. Your brain rewires itself, becomes a survival machine. Problem is, it doesn't unwire when you're safe again. Kira lowered herself into the chair with deliberate slowness, fighting every instinct to make quick movements, watching his eyes track her descent like a cat watching a bird. This was supposed to be a simple assignment. Spend 3 months studying human cultural adaptation with a war hero, write her dissertation, advance Velasian understanding of their newest galactic neighbors, maybe make a friend. Instead, she was trapped in a room with someone whose nervous system had been rewired into a threat detection system, and she was registering as something to be tracked, cataloged, hunted. "Can you control it?" she asked, genuinely curious now, her scientific mind overriding her fear response. Marcus settled into his chair with the kind of controlled stillness that suggested he was very aware of his own movements, his own potential to frighten. "Sometimes," he said, and she watched him deliberately not track the maintenance drone that passed by the window behind her, his jaw tightening with effort. "It's worse when I'm tired or stressed. Better when I'm focused on something else. My therapist calls it hypervigilance. I call it annoying." Despite herself, Kira smiled, her pointed ears twitching with amusement, a Velasian tell she usually controlled better. His eyes snapped to the movement instantly, and she froze again, the smile dying on her lips. They stared at each other for a long moment, human and alien, predator and prey, both trapped in a dynamic neither wanted. "This is going to be a problem," she said quietly. "Yeah," Marcus agreed, looking genuinely miserable. "I'm sorry. I can request a replacement if you want. I know I'm not exactly the welcoming committee your people were promised." Something in his defeated tone sparked rebellion in her chest. Kira hadn't become the youngest xenoanthropologist in Velasian history by running from challenges. And this human, this broken soldier, with eyes that saw too much, was the most fascinating subject she'd ever encountered. "No," she said firmly, making a decision that would change everything. "We're going to figure this out together." That's what first contact is about, right? Understanding each other's differences. Over the following days, Kira learned to exist in Marcus Chen's world of constant motion tracking, and he learned to exist with someone who noticed his noticing. She started narrating her movements before making them. "I'm going to reach for my datapad now or my hair is about to move because the ventilation just increased." He started warning her before his tracking kicked in. "Sorry, about to track your hand, or the way you tap your stylus is really hitting my motion sensors. It became almost a game between them, this careful dance of awareness and accommodation. But underneath the practical adaptation, something unexpected was growing. Kira found herself fascinated by the way his mind worked, how he perceived the world in layers of movement and stillness, threat and safety, how 6 months of trauma had rebuilt his entire sensory experience. Marcus found himself drawn to her patience, her curiosity, the way she treated his condition as an interesting puzzle rather than a character flaw, the brilliant mind behind those expressive eyes that shifted color with her moods. A Velasian trait. He'd started to read like a book. "Tell me about Titan Station," she said one evening in the observation lounge, stars streaking past the windows, her voice soft with invitation rather than demand. Marcus was quiet for a long time, his eyes tracking the distant movement of a passing cargo ship, the flecks of her fingers on her cup of Velasian tea, the pulse at her throat, before he finally spoke. 47 of us when the meteor hit," he said, his voice distant. 12 when rescue arrived 6 months later. "You learn to notice everything when resources are failing. Is that water drip getting faster? That means a pipe is degrading. Is the air recycler making a different sound? That means filters are clogging. Did Johnson's breathing just change rhythm? That means his oxygen allotment is running out and he's not telling anyone." He paused, and Kira saw his hands trembling slightly. "I spent 6 months tracking every tiny detail because missing one meant someone died. And a lot of someone's died anyway." Kira did something then that surprised them both. She slowly, deliberately, with full narration of her intent, reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You survived," she said firmly, her luminescent skin casting a soft glow on their joined hands. "You kept people alive. Your brain adapted to save you. That's not broken, Marcus. That's extraordinary." His eyes tracked to their hands, stayed there, and for the first time since they'd met, his tracking seemed like wonder instead of threat. "Your people glow when you feel strong emotions," he observed, watching the light pulse gently beneath her skin. "I've been tracking it, cataloging which emotions cause which patterns. Hope you don't mind." "I noticed you noticing," Kira said, with a soft laugh, her ears twitching. "What have you learned?" Marcus's smile was genuine, transforming his scarred face into something beautiful. "That you glow brightest when you're excited about a new idea. That you dim slightly when you're uncertain. And right now, you're glowing in a pattern I haven't seen before." Kira felt her skin warm, knew the glow was intensifying, knew he could see it. "That's because this is a new emotion," she admitted, her heart racing. "We don't have a word for it in Velasian, but I think in human, you might call it connection." Before Marcus could respond, the station alarm shrieked to life, red emergency lights flooding the observation lounge, and his entire demeanor shifted instantly from gentle to tactical. "Hull breach, Section 7, the automated voice announced. All personnel evacuate to emergency pods." But Kira was already on her feet, her scientific mind racing through station schematics. "Section 7 houses the environmental controls for the entire station. If we evacuate, both our ships lose their docking clamps. Everyone dies." Marcus was already moving, his eyes tracking every flicker of the emergency lights, every spark from the damaged panel, every piece of debris floating past the window. His trauma response, now perfectly suited to the crisis. "Then we don't evacuate," he said, with absolute certainty. "We fix it. Can you handle the technical repairs if I navigate us there?" The journey through the damaged station was a nightmare of sparking wires, failing gravity, and collapsing corridors. But Kira discovered that Marcus's hypervigilance wasn't a curse in chaos, it was a superpower. He tracked the pattern of falling debris before it fell, predicted structural failures by the subtle vibrations in the walls, navigated them through pitch darkness by following the movement of air currents she couldn't even perceive. "Jump left now," he commanded, and she jumped, trusting him completely, as a support beam crashed through the space she'd occupied seconds before. "Duck and roll forward," he called, and she obeyed without question, sliding under a closing emergency door with milliseconds to spare. They moved like a single organism, his perception and her trust, his trauma-born gifts and her scientific brilliance, human and alien united in purpose. When they reached Section 7, the environmental controls were a mess of damaged systems and failing backups, complex repairs that would take her precious minutes. They didn't have I need you to not move, Kira said urgently, pulling tools from her emergency kit. I need to move quickly, and I can't worry about triggering your tracking. Can you handle that? Marcus positioned himself by the door, his back to her, his whole body tense with effort. I'll watch for more debris, he said, his voice strained. Just talk to me while you work. Your voice helps me focus past the tracking urge. So Kira narrated everything as her hands flew over the controls, rerouting power from secondary systems now, bypassing the damaged relay, compensating for pressure differential in the oxygen lines, and Marcus tracked the corridor, calling out threats. Debris cluster incoming from above. You've got 30 seconds. Gravity fluctuation building in the north corridor. Might affect your calibrations. Temperature dropping 3 degrees. The heating system just failed in Section 9. They worked in perfect synchronization, her repairs and his protection. Minutes stretching into eternity as the station groaned and shuddered around them. Done. Kira finally shouted, slamming the final panel closed as the environmental controls stabilized, green lights flooding the system status board. Behind them, the corridor chose that moment to give up entirely, the floor buckling, the ceiling collapsing, and Kira felt herself falling backward into vacuum and void. Marcus's hand closed around her wrist with inhuman speed, his tracking ability letting him react before she'd even begun to fall, pulling her forward into his arms as the corridor behind them opened to space. They crashed together against the secure wall of Section 7. Debris and atmosphere screaming past the emergency force field that had activated just in time. His arms wrapped protectively around her, her face pressed against his chest, both of them shaking with adrenaline and terror and relief. I've got you, Marcus whispered into her hair, his voice rough with emotion. I'm tracking your heartbeat, your breathing, your glow. And I've got you. Kira pulled back just enough to look up at him, her skin luminescent with an intensity that filled the damaged room with light, and saw that his eyes, those predatory, tracking, hypervigilant eyes, were looking at her not like prey, but like something precious, something worth protecting, something worth surviving for. You saved my life, she breathed, her hands pressed against his chest, feeling his racing heart beneath her palms. You saved everyone's life, Marcus countered, his hand coming up to gently touch her pointed ear, the alien feature that marked her as other, his fingers trembling slightly. I just made sure you lived to get the credit. The station's all-clear signal sounded. Other crew members would be returning soon, but neither of them moved from their protective embrace. On Velasian, Kira said softly, her eyes never leaving his, we have a saying, the broken places let the light shine through. I never understood it until I met you, Marcus. Your broken places, they don't make you less. They make you extraordinary. Marcus Chen, survivor of Titan Station, carrier of scars, both visible and neurological, war hero who couldn't stop tracking every tiny movement, did something he hadn't done since before the disaster. He stopped trying to control his eyes and let himself simply see the alien girl in his arms, really see her, with all his intensity, focus not on threat assessment, but on wonder. I'm still going to track your movements, he warned, but his voice was soft, almost tender. My brain doesn't unwire, Kira. This is who I am now. Every flicker, every breath, every time your hair moves or your skin glows or your ears twitch, I'm going to notice. I'm going to track it all. Kira's smile was radiant, her glow pulsing in that new pattern he'd first seen in the observation lounge. The one that meant connection, that meant something deeper than friendship. That meant the beginning of something neither of their species had words for yet. Then I'll make sure every movement is worth tracking, she promised. And slowly, deliberately, giving him time to process every detail, she rose on her toes and pressed her forehead to his, a Velasian gesture of trust and intimacy, her luminescent skin casting soft light on his scarred features. They stayed like that as the station restored around them, human and alien, predator and prey transformed into something new. Something beautiful, something that proved first contact wasn't about eliminating differences, but about finding the extraordinary in each other's broken places. The horizon's edge had survived its near disaster, but more importantly, two souls had found each other across the vast divide of species and trauma and fear, connected by the very thing that should have driven them apart, eyes that tracked every tiny movement, and a heart brave enough to keep moving anyway. In the weeks that followed, Kira and Marcus became the station's most effective team. his hypervigilance and her scientific brilliance, solving problems no one else could perceive. But more than that, they became proof that understanding doesn't require being the same. That connection can grow in the space between different ways of experiencing the world. Kira learned to love the intensity of his attention, the way his tracking made her feel seen in every moment, every detail, every subtle expression noticed and valued. Marcus learned that his trauma response wasn't something to hide or apologize for, but a unique way of perceiving reality that someone could not just accept, but treasure. On their last evening before Kira's scheduled return to Velasian, they stood together in the observation lounge where they'd first connected, watching stars stream past, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting in the hollow of his throat. "Come with me," Kira said suddenly, the words she'd been holding back for weeks, finally breaking free to Velasian. "My dissertation is about you, about us, about how two different species can adapt to each other. But I don't want it to end when the paper is finished, Marcus. I want to keep adapting with you. I want to keep being seen by you." Marcus's eyes tracked the distant stars, the pulse at her temple, the hope and fear warring in her expression, before settling on her eyes, holding her gaze with that intense focus that used to frighten her and now felt like home. "I've spent 2 years since Titan Station feeling like a broken piece of equipment," he said quietly, his hand finding hers, fingers intertwining. "But with you, I feel like maybe I'm not broken at all. Maybe I'm just different. And maybe different is exactly what I'm supposed to be. Is that a yes?" Kira asked, her skin glowing so brightly now that passing crew members would later report seeing light streaming from the observation lounge like a beacon. Marcus smiled. That transformation of scarred features into beauty, and for once didn't apologize when his eyes tracked every tiny detail of her joyful expression, cataloging this moment in the hypervigilant memory that forgot nothing. "That's a yes," he confirmed, "to Velasian, to your dissertation, to whatever comes next. On one condition: you have to keep moving, keep being worth tracking, keep letting your ears twitch and your skin glow and your hair catch the light. Because that's what I see now when I look at you. Not prey, not threat. Just the most extraordinary person I've ever had the privilege to notice." Kira laughed, the sound like music in the quiet lounge, and kissed him with all the emotion her glowing skin proclaimed. A kiss he tracked in perfect detail from the first touch to the final reluctant separation, filing it away in his indelible memory as the moment everything changed. Behind them, visible through the observation window, both Earth and Velasian hung in the darkness. Two worlds that had found each other among the stars, much like two souls had found each other despite every difference, every trauma, every reason to remain separate and afraid. The human's eyes still tracked every tiny movement, still cataloged and assessed and noticed with predatory intensity. But the alien girl no longer stopped moving to avoid his gaze. Instead, she moved with purpose, with joy, with the confidence of someone who knew that being truly seen, every flicker and breath and subtle shift, wasn't something to fear, but something to treasure. And somewhere in that dance of movement and attention, of difference and acceptance, of broken places that let the light shine through, they created something neither human nor Velasian, but entirely their own, a love built on really, truly seeing each other in all their extraordinary, damaged, beautiful detail. Commander Marcus Chen and Dr. Kira of Velasian would go on to become legends in their own right, not for their individual achievements, but for what they proved was possible when two beings chose understanding over fear. When they transformed the predator-prey dynamic into partnership. When they let their broken places become the foundation for something stronger than either could build alone. But that night, on Horizon's edge, under the light of two homeworlds, they were simply two people who had learned that sometimes the things that should push us apart, the traumas and differences and alien perspectives, are exactly what we need to finally, fully, extraordinarily connect.